Dunwoody in June of 1976, which is a long time ago. I've worked in different aspects of the industry. I started out as a maintenance electrician because that's the only work that I could get in 1976. So I just needed to feed my family. I did that for a couple of years, worked as a maintenance electrician, and it was excellent training to understand how to troubleshoot and kind of how things can break down after they're installed. So that was great training in that aspect. Then I became a union apprentice, went through the apprenticeship, was a union electrician for 17 years. And back in 95, I went into management. When I was an electrician, because I'd gone to college before I went to trade school, I had organizational skills and speaking skills and things like that. So I rose right away to being a foreman and running crews. And I've run crews as big as 40 electricians on a job. I've done high-rise buildings, hospitals, chemical plants, tons of generator jobs, ground-up buildings, remodels, historic renovations. So in my, what is it, almost a 40-year career, I've seen a lot happen in the industry. And to me, there's no place in industry that I would rather be than in the electrical business. It's ever evolving. There's always something to do. So even in a down market, you can go and do renovation work or something like that. But for someone that's curious about the world, you get to experience so many different things. I mean, as a project manager, I've worked on both of the stadiums here. I've worked on light rail. I've worked on high-rise buildings. I've been in all different kinds of industries, medical devices. I mean, right now, some of my biggest customers, medical device companies. I have a couple of food manufacturing companies. We do work for the company that does all the tortillas for McDonald's for the whole northern tier of the United States and all of Canada. We do all their work on a design build. We have a salsa manufacturer. We have a couple of injection molding companies, precision manufacturing companies. Those are kind of who our customers are. But we also work a lot for general contractors, property owners, doing remodeling work, ground up buildings and things like that. So I've gone through the industry from someone that knew nothing to an apprentice, to a manager of other electricians, to an owner of businesses, to a project manager, estimator. I market, I set up businesses, I help grow businesses for other people. So I've really seen the industry from kind of start to finish. I mentioned I worked with Parsons Electric, I've worked with Hunt Electric, through my teaching at Dunwoody, and I have for years, for 30 years, I taught code classes, grounding and stuff like that. And I've met a lot of people in this industry, the owners of most of the big shops in town and things like that. So we discussed the problems you have running an electrical contracting business, the economics of the business. A certain amount of this applies to engineering as well. And what it is that there's a finite amount of money for every project that you do. I don't care if it's a theatrical lighting project, they've got a budget, you know. If it's a big stadium, they've got a budget. You got to figure out how to get the most bang for the buck. Where we kind of, in contracting, are almost the gatekeepers of the budget in a certain way, in that you have an engineer that sits down and draws an awesome project, but you're dealing with a customer that has a budget. They have an idea in mind how much they can spend on the electrical system for the new stadium or the new office building or whatever. And while you'd like to give them all the great technology you've learned about at Dunwoody or you learned about from manufacturers, there's always that eye on the budget. And engineers do a certain amount of seat of the pants budgeting, and I know this because from time to time they'll call me up and say, okay, we're going to do these 3 generators, what would my install cost be? So they kind of lean back on contractor friends if it's things they haven't done. They can square foot an office building and tell you, okay, your electrical is going to be $8 a square foot or whatever, and use rules of thumb to get there. But when it comes to specific things that they've either not seen before, don't know how to price or whatever, a lot of them have friends in the industry that they call up and ask for help. One of the things I want to share with you today is kind of the things that go into electrical contracting, the economics of electrical contracting. If you don't understand something, want more information, feel free. I mean, we'll be casual here. You guys just interrupt me and ask questions. But the interesting thing about electrical contracting, in a way, it's a tough business, as is most contracting. If you're strictly a contractor that's out chasing jobs with general contractors, where you're getting invited to bid a project, you're putting a number together, you're competing with maybe 3 to 5 to, on a public job like a fire station, there might be 25 electrical contractors going after that job. On the front end, you got to give them the cheapest price that you can in order to score the job, because nothing happens until you're the low bidder and they say, come on, you're going to do this job. Then you get a contract, then you got to start figuring out how to do it. That's why, whether you're in engineering or contracting, the whole concept of the economics of what we're doing becomes important. In here, it's academic. Count the outlets, put a number on it. You don't have to worry about what's the reaction to that number going to be. Did I waste my time spending 30 hours doing an estimate on a job where I have no hope of getting the project because my number was too high? But if I bid the project too low and I don't cover all my costs and overhead for the company, and I lose money on that project, I won't be in the industry very long. And it's why when you first start estimating for someone like Parsons, there'll be a lot of people. You're going to be doing a small part of it, and there'll be a lot of people putting the project together that have the knowledge and skills to say, okay, you told me it will take 21 hours to wire this room. I can look at this room and say, okay, I got 16 lights, I got this, I got that. 21 hours is a little bit too high. We got to get that number down or we won't get the project. And nothing happens till you get the project. You won't get a paycheck. The owner won't make any money. Your electricians will have to sit at home, which they won't like. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about the economics of contracting today. Let's see. The way I found that's good to illustrate this is if you have $100 worth of construction contract. Okay, I have $100 worth of contract. This could be 100,000, it could be 1,000,000, it could be 10 million, and it'll divide up this way. These are just historical numbers that I know from doing competitive bid work and commercial. Kind of breaks out like this. Commodity material will represent 15% of those costs. And the commodity material is right what we have up here. Pipe, wire, electrical devices, the boxes, the fasteners, the hangers, the adhesives, the tape, the wire nuts, and all that is our commodity material. That material, if you're a decent estimator, you can nail that material if you've got a good estimating system. We use AccuBid. In an earlier life, I used McCormick. I switched to AccuBid in 1995, and I've never looked back. It's a workhorse. It's utilitarian. When you understand how to work it, it gives a contractor everything they need to do. We estimate by assemblies. Probably found that if you're estimating at all, it's assemblies, an outlet assembly, EMT, in a drywall partition. It's going to give you your pipe, wire, connectors, boxes, mud rings, hangers, screws, the whole works, labor everything out for you. So that you'll find that if you do a good job taking off your drawings, if you mark things off, if you put them onto your takeoff sheets, if you follow a process. When I teach a young estimator, I teach him process first. And I don't care if he's doing a job that's 2 offices and a water fountain. I teach him the process. You're going to take this estimating sheet. I'll show you this at the end of my presentation. You're going to take this estimating sheet. You're going to take the plan. You're going to highlight each outlet as you take it off. You're going to write a number on the estimating sheet, and you're going to use that estimating sheet to enter into the estimating system. The reason I get him to do that is the estimating sheet is a physical audit trail. I can sit down and review somebody's estimate. You'll hear about estimators taking it right from the sheet and putting right in the computer. If you miss something, have no way of double checking. So I'm a firm believer. I learned to do hand estimating when I first started, where you take off and extend everything by hand. And I still do that on some small projects, just whip up a quick spreadsheet and do it that way. But if you learn an estimating process and you follow that process, I don't care if it's a $2,000 job or a $20 million job, you can have confidence in your estimating if you follow the same process every single time. That's what they'll teach at Parsons is we have a process. Here's how we do it. We all do it the same so we can check each other's estimates. It's the same. And so at one time, I managed a group of about 7 estimators and project managers, and I did their bid reviews. And they know exactly what I wanted to see when I stepped into their office or their cubicle. The plans were laid out, they were highlighted, the sheets had the numbers crossed off when they got that sheet completely taken off. They had a list of questions for me on a legal pad. They had all their takeoff sheets. They had their extension from their estimate. They had, it was just all there. And I could walk through and I could go and review a $500,000 job, half an hour or an hour, and have confidence that the individual had a good estimate. So the commodity material, we can count it, we can measure it, we can put it in our estimating system, we can know that we have good prices. Quoted materials, there's 20% in here. That varies per job, and part of it is how elaborate of a job is it. If it's a simple classroom like this, where we just have acrylic prismatic fixtures, they're commodities, they're inexpensive, you won't have a really expensive lighting project. If I have a job at the airport or the Northrop Auditorium, where they're picking out custom light fixtures or high-end LED fixtures or something like that, this could grow, but in general, 20% is a good number, a school, a library, or something like that. So this quoted material, these are things that I can literally send sheets off to my vendors and get firm pricing on bid day. It'd be the light fixture package, switchgear package, generators, nurse call systems, different things like that, that they're going to sell me a package of materials. They're going to guarantee me that price on bid day, and I can carry that into my estimate. So this is kind of a locked-in deal, too. If I gave them all the information, all the panel schedules, the riser diagram, the fixture schedule, and my counts, what did I do? Oh, too smart, okay. So I can lock in this quoted material number on bid day. I'll get back to that, too, because that has a lot to do with your vendor relationships.
And plus you can highlight these anything you want. If you have any of these pages.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to write.
Okay. So then we got the subcontractors. These are things like most commercial electrical contracting companies have at least some subcontractors that they use. These can be excavators if you're doing a big parking lot job, a concrete contractor that's going to pour pads for you, fire alarm contractors, voice data contractors. Some of the bigger contractors may have divisions that do this, but a lot of times they still solicit a firm quote from them, and they're going to be locked into providing. If my fire alarm division told me they can do the fire alarm for $30,000, I'm putting it in my estimate, I'm holding their feet to the fire, they're going to do it for $30,000. So this is another piece that we can kind of guarantee on bid day. If we gave the right information to our subcontractors and got them to commit to, I've got everything covered on the plans, I can meet the specifications, now I got to lock on the subcontractor numbers. So if you see where we are now, that's about 40% of the job that we've locked in. There's not much danger there. Labor costs, look where that is. That's 40% of the job. What goes into labor costs? These are my electricians, apprentices, laborers, anybody that I have to send out there on an hourly basis that's going to be tied into that project. Labor costs in a good company that trains their people, has good tools, and manages their people, there's still a risk associated with labor costs. And the risk kind of comes in this is, how good is my leadership on the job? Do I have a known foreman? A lot of times if I bid a job, well, I would say 90% of the time, I know when I'm bidding that job who I'm going to have run it. He's done, like we do Buffalo Wild Wings. I got a guy that's done 4 or 5 Buffalo Wild Wings. It's a no-brainer. If I get that job, Andy's going to run it. I have another guy in my company that's done all of our generator jobs for the last 3 years. If I score a generator job, Bob's going to run the generator job. He doesn't have to think about it. He knows what all the elements are, how he's going to put it together, what order. So if I'm starting a new company, or if I have a company that has a volatile workforce, it's hard to be successful because, okay, I get a high-rise building and I look around my company. I don't have one person that's ever wired a high-rise building or worked in one. How am I going to have a leader to do that job? So these are kind of part of the calculus in labor. Another thing that can hurt your labor, if you get stuck with a bad general contractor, if you get stuck with a bad soup on the job, someone that doesn't know how to schedule and stage the job so that the work flows and they're forcing you to jump from one area to another area. I had a job years ago that was a pretty straightforward job. It was a classroom and gymnasium addition on Providence Academy. That job was an utter disaster. And it was an utter disaster because the soup on the job and the project manager did not care about the subs. They did not care about how the job went together. It was a 4-story job. They refused to put in a skip for a material lift or a man lift to go from floor to floor. And when we bid the job, we were told we'd be able to use the elevator in the existing school. But as part of their negotiations with the school, they said no construction people will go in the school. That meant nobody could use their elevator. So we had to figure out how to get our carts and our materials from first floor to third floor to fourth floor. Made it worse is there was 2 classroom wings separated by a gymnasium. So there wasn't hallways that went through between the 2 classroom rings. So if I had a guy working on classrooms on this side and he was done, he had to get his cart, his ladder, his drill, and all that to this side. He had to carry it down the stairs to first floor, cross over first floor, and carry it back up to where it was terribly inefficient. We got killed on labor. And part of it was we had a general that didn't care about us. We had a general that didn't include money for some basic necessities of material handling of the job, and it ended up being a disaster. If you have someone that doesn't know how to schedule a job, if you have someone that has an adversarial relationship with his subs where he can't get the tinning contractor to cooperate with him because, hey, I'm the low bidder on this job, I'll probably never work for you again, I don't care about you, I'm going to send my crew there when it suits me. You see a lot of these things happening. Bad weather, bad soils that cause delays, there's different things like this that can delay a project or cause you to have extra labor on a project. This is my highly variable job. And because of that, when we estimate a job, we do a calculation that's called the labor risk ratio. We look at the total amount of markup we've got in that job, and we look at the cost of our labor, and we do a ratio between those two. And they say, in this case, I have $40 worth of labor out of my $100. And I have, I think this works out to about 3%. Well, let's take it before this. Say I have 18% in there. So if I have $18 worth of potential profit on this job, and I have 40% labor costs. So this is all the markup on my labor, subcontractors, quoted material, commodities, ends up being this 18% at the end. So essentially what I do is I take 18 and divide it by 40, and it gives me a ratio or a percentage, and that percentage is my labor risk ratio. What we do is we look at the job and the variables. This is where experience comes in. We look at the variables on the job, the experience on the job. It's like, is it a familiar type of work? Do I have an experienced foreman that's done that type of work that can run it? Is it in our geographical area? Is it with a general contractor we've worked with before? And then what about the structure? Is it a familiar kind of a structure? It's a 3-story medical building, done a dozen of them. We're not afraid of that kind of work. And so all those things we look at to kind of come up with how risky the job is to us. Well, if I'm doing a familiar general, familiar foreman, familiar type of work, it's not a ground-up building, it's inside an existing building, so I don't have to worry about weather or permits or anything like that. I might go in there at a 25% labor risk ratio. If it's something chancy like a water treatment plant that's going to go on for a year and a half, and it's a public bid, and it's a general that I haven't worked with before, and it's in Wilbur instead of in the Twin Cities, I've got all these risks involved in that job. I might want to mark it up to the point where I've got 40% or 50% in there so that if things go really wrong and my labor goes over 40%, I'll still have a break-even job. I won't contribute to my overhead, I won't contribute to my profit, but I won't have to take real money out of my pocket from another job, from other earnings, and pay to finish that job. So those are kind of things that contractors look at is, what's my risk in this project? And it's one of the sad things where you see contractors fail, especially people that are chasing public work. You can start a brand new contracting company today, and you can go bid a public job for a school district or a municipality tomorrow. You might not know what you're doing, you might not have the financial wherewithal to do it, you might not understand labor risk. It's one of the reasons I don't bid that kind of work, because you could be one of 20 bidders on a project like that, and the guy that's going to take it is the guy that's, got himself and a buddy working out of their house, and doesn't have a lot of his own equipment, doesn't understand what overhead is and the fact that he needs to pay himself a living wage. So he'll go in there and take the thing dirt cheap, maybe break even on the job, just pay himself wages and things like that. So those are tough. And even when you start getting into a little bit bigger jobs, you'll see unsophisticated contractors that don't understand labor risk, but they got to get something for their guys to do. So they'll go chase this job, kind of screw the number down as tight as they can. I watched this happen with a guy that was a former partner of mine that we split up and went different ways. His idea was, I can bring in $3 million worth of work a year. I can bring in $5 million worth of work a year. And what he would do is he'd get out and compete on things like Walmart's and Target and things like that, and try and compete against companies that were established and experienced in that type of work. I just remember one particular Target store, he went out and he bid the Target store, and he came in $100,000 under Muska on about $1 million job. So he was 10% below Muska Electric. Muska has probably done 150 Target stores. You think they got foremen that know how to do it? You think they know what the risks are? Do you think they know the generals that are doing them? Absolutely. So if Muska is telling me this is a $1.1 million job, and this other fellow that's never done a Target store comes in at $1 million, who do you think is right? Yeah, it's just the way it is. And so I watched this guy literally, after he stopped being my partner because of some of his reckless ways, go on to literally bankrupt 3 small contractors. Talk the big game, I can get you all this work, I'll help you, grow your company and stuff. You don't grow your company by selling work cheap. You grow your company by knowing your costs, knowing what your experience are, knowing what the risks are, and then just executing it right, day after day after day after day. Some people think contracting is a get-rich-quick thing. I always tell people, no, you'll get rich in contracting, but you'll get rich slow. You got to build the relationships, you got to build your workforces, and that's why I so admire what they've done with Parsons Electric. I remember Parsons Electric when they were downtown on Portland Avenue, and they had like 9 electricians, and they did mostly service work, and they had a motor and welder repair shop and stuff like that. And, yeah. And they had this little niche, and they, that was before they really blew up into contracting when Dan Dolan took over back in the 70s, I guess it would have been. And so I've always used that as a case study of someone that I admire. I know a lot of their managers, and if they go into a new field to try a new type of work, they manage by metrics. They take their estimate, they tear it apart and say, okay, we're doing this apartment building, we haven't done much multifamily, we figure it takes 17 hours to rough in one apartment, go. And they keep track of it. How long did it take to do the first apartment, the 5th one, the 10th one, and that's the way they do it. And then if they've done a whole floor and things aren't going right, and they're not hitting their numbers, they go, wait, yeah, do we have the wrong foreman? Do we have the wrong materials? Do we have the wrong method? Let's keep track of this and figure it out. I love working with companies like that, and that's the way we try and run our own company. The guys know when they start a job how many hours are estimated for that job. They'll know how many hours on feeders, how many hours on lighting, and that type of thing. I actually did that as an electrician, and it totally blew away the owner of ERC. I would ask for the estimate. And his thought was, there's an adversarial relationship between the electrician in the field and management. That was the old way of doing it. We're butting heads, If I tell the electrician he has 2,000 hours to do this job, he's going to burn up all 2,000 hours whether he needs them or not. And it's like, no, it's not that way. What I wanted to do is see, okay, if I'm going to plan this feeder rack and it has so many 3 inches and so many 2 inches and stuff, how do I know how long it's supposed to take my electricians? Because I want to drive those guys to beat the numbers. To beat the numbers. That's what a good foreman does, beat the labor. I tell my guys that, they go, I hope we can make money on this job. And I always tell them, here's the labor number. If you make this number, we will make money on the job. If you beat this number, we'll make good money on this job. And if we beat this number and get a few change orders along the way, we'll hit a home run. I'm satisfied with singles and doubles, but when those things all come together, you get to hit a home run. So beyond labor cost, there's another predictable there, and that's general conditions. And these are things like your permits, if you have to have a bond on the job, if you have to rent equipment, if you have costs for your office trailer or things like that. This is where I put like my lift rental in here. If I have any consulting fees, I have to have some engineering or testing done, I'll put that in my general conditions. And that's usually fairly low. It's predictable. It doesn't change very much. Then when we look at the cost of running a contracting company, I'd say a 15% overhead rate is a pretty good thing. And that's how do we keep the lights on back at the shop? The office, the warehouse, the delivery drivers, all the estimators, project managers, health insurance, rent on the building, utilities, and that type of thing. This is kind of your home office overhead. And then this little slice at the end here, when you're all done for the year, if you're out there contracting in a competitive marketplace, and only doing contracting, I'm not talking about service companies, but you're probably looking at 2 or 3% net profit that comes to the bottom line. And what is that net profit good for? That's money left over. You can bonus it to the electricians. You can buy more infrastructure to help grow the business, new computer systems, new trucks, new scissor lifts, whatever it is that management decides. You can turn around and bonus your people. That's what we always earmark about 15 to 20% of that to give back to the employees at the end of the year. So we figured they helped earn that profit. We're going to turn it back to give them an incentive to do it again next year. So that's kind of the economics of $100 worth of construction. Now let's look at the different areas that go into that. How are we doing on time?
Good.
Do I have an hour? Can I go longer than an hour? You guys interested?
I think it was good. I like $100. It brings it home.
Oh, and I do this for electricians. Like, I was one of the people that was helping to grow Ace Electrical back in the early 2000s. I came on board, they had 20 electricians, and we're doing maybe 5 or 6 million a year. I was there for 5.5 years. We grew it to about 120 electricians, and we were doing 30 million a year. I mean, we had a great thing going there. But part of what I did, hired and trained estimators and project managers and trained foremen so that they understood the economics of contracting and how we could make more money. Put systems in place for how do we do an estimate, how do we check an estimate, how do we set up a project as far as the paperwork of the project, how do we get material to the jobs, how do we hold people accountable, that's the type of thing I did. So now what I'm showing you here is if I'm going to drill this job down as a project manager and make good money on this job, where are my areas of opportunity? Commodity materials, we use what we call database prices. So our vendors once a week send us a sheet that shows us where our commodity prices are that week. And you might have seen them, you might not have seen them, but they actually email, and we have 3 or 4 main vendors that do this. So you'll look at, and I always benchmark off of a couple of items that are easy to remember. 500 MCM wire. Right now it's going for $7.85 a foot. Okay? And I can watch that number go up and down, and whatever percentage 500 MCM moves, all copper moves that same percentage. Same thing with aluminum. You keep a number in mind of, it's $1.85 for 500 MCM. If that number moves, you got to go adjust your database. And so we keep weekly maintaining our database for our commodity materials, especially on bigger projects, so that we've got an idea of where we can buy that material. But once I'm awarded the project, copper may have gone up, it may have gone down. Different wholesalers have different strategies how they'll sell copper. A big company like Parsons LaHunt may do an annual negotiation and say, I'm going to pay 7% above the raw copper price on COMEX or whatever the thing is. You'll have a number that you key to. Smaller company like me that maybe spends, I don't know, in copper, we probably got 100,000, 150,000 a year in copper. We're not going to get that. So what we'll do is, once we get awarded the project, we'll give them a list of all our pipe and wire and boxes and stuff like that, and we'll shop it out to 3 vendors and let them compete for it. If I do that, I can maybe save 5% on my commodity material over what I've got in my database. That's one of the strategies that we use. My quoted material, if I can get vendors to compete for my quotes, I might find a vendor that'll shave a % off my switchgear or my lighting, because they're competing too. They're trying to get those jobs. So if I can squeeze 1% out of my quoted material, subcontractors, same thing. I might have a fire alarm guy that says, Paul, I really need this job. My guys are going to have to stay home. Otherwise, I'll give you a discount if you put me on this project, you know. General conditions, those are firm fixed things. I mean, it's really tough to not use scissor lifts on the job or not get a permit or a bond for the job. So that doesn't move much. My overhead, that's kind of a fixed number. There's obviously things you can save, you know, but a lot of times it's so minuscule. What are you going to do? Reuse copy paper on the other side, or, you know, not buy highlighters for the estimators? So there's not too much wiggle room there. That also includes things like your general liability insurance and, you know, kind of heats, lights, gas, water. Okay, I skipped over labor. When I show a 5% labor savings, that's the key. That's the key. Yes. Can I look at this job and say, okay, I have 400 identical fixtures. What can I do on the front end with my commodity material? Can I have them packaged different? Can I have them job packed so that they come with the whips already on them, the lamps already in them? You know, can I find a better bracket to put in, a better method for doing my assemblies? For a while, we were seeing a lot of this prefabricated outlet whips and things like that. People have tried different strategies. Hunt, for years, they had their own prefab shop in the back room. They'd use Apprentice Labor, and they'd get a big office building where there was a lot of repetition, and they'd build a whole bunch of outlet assemblies that all had a 20-foot whip. So you'd just go around, screw it to the wall, and throw the whip up in the ceiling, and then come back and tie it into a junction box. So there's different strategies you can have like that. When I was running work, particularly for ERC, they used to give me a bad time because my commodity material, when they got all done and audited the job, my commodity material was always a little bit higher than everybody else's. I might actually have more material cost than they calculated. But what I was doing is I'd go out and find like a beeline product or something that could cut down on the labor. So I was one of the first ones in our shop that used the one-piece conduit clamps for going onto a piece of unistrut. It's just the U-shaped thing with one screw in it. Or battery drills and tips and things like that. And what I found was I could speed my guys up without making them work any harder if I found labor-saving material. But there's a cost associated with that. And it was the same thing with wire nuts. Years ago when Ideal came out with the tan twisters, when I saw that and I figured out you could chuck we used to have these little Milwaukee power screwdrivers, you could chuck a driver in the end of that to put your wire nuts on, the guys could fly. And if you had a lot of splicing to do, like I did a high-rise hotel, 818 rooms, and there's like 20 openings in a room, if you could fly on splicing that and have people that did nothing but splicing all day long, you could really knock down your labor. So that's part of that is, how does the foreman strategize? How does the project manager help the foreman say, for instance, if I got commodity material and I got a 5-story building and I know a certain amount of my MC is going on each floor by my estimate, I could have the wholesale house package up skids of material that were exactly what I needed for that floor. When they show up on the job, it's marked first floor, grab a pallet jack, take it on the skip, take it to first floor, You don't have to screw around having guys walk down to the basement every day and carry up 4 rolls of MC. So there's different things you can do there to stage the materials, to provide the materials that'll save you labor. This is your biggest opportunity. This is the area too. I said leadership is important. You know, who's the right guy to run this job? What's his personality like? Does he have a team of guys that work well with him? That type of thing. So just look at the impact of that. If you can save 5% on commodity materials, if you look at that $100 bill, you're only getting 0.75% of the total cost of the project. That's the only return you're getting there. You know, in the meantime, 0.75 of $1 million job, you know, $7,500, it's something. Quoted material, 20%, 0.2% of the total job. Subcontractors, if I can squeeze 1% out of them, it's only 0.05% of the total job. But look at this one, labor costs. If I can save 5% on labor costs, I've added 2% to the job. If you add these all up, it's 3%. If you compare them to what we were making, right there, if you compare them to what we were making already, I was making 3%. If I could squeeze 3% more out of every job, what did I do? I doubled the profit for the company at the end of the year by being smart on how I did these things. So how do you save on labor? Pay less? Well, if you're in a union environment, you can't really do it. If you're in a non-union environment, you can do it, but it's not going to be very popular with your guys. Hey, I took this job really cheap, so instead of paying you $35 an hour, I'm going to pay you $28 an hour. Hooray! Oh, wait a minute. $28. If I take a $7 an hour cut and pay, that's $280 a week. I don't want to do work on that job. Carrot, you know, can I incentivize them and tell them, okay, here's the deal, you know, we got to rough in 20 rooms a week. If you get 20 rooms a week, you can go home early, or, you know, maybe there's a financial incentive. If we beat the labor on this job by 5%, you know, everybody gets a $100 bonus and a ticket to the Twins game or something. You know, so there's different ways that you can incentivize people. You can threaten them. This works really well in a down market like 2008 or 2009, because when there's people lined up outside your company and there's 600 guys on the bench looking for a job, it's like, you can't get it done, someone else will. So it's kind of a funny thing, because I spent 30 years in a union environment, and one of the things that used to drive me crazy, both as a foreman and as a project manager, is the mindset of some of the electricians is, we saw this happen on the TCF Bank Stadium, is 2008, early 2009, there's 1,000 guys on the bench. And so now you've got guys saying, take your time, slow down, don't burn it up because you're going to get laid off. And this is where good leadership comes in. And if you're managing by metrics and say, okay, you've got to get 16 fixtures a day up. If the guy's getting 15 up, you tell him, hey, you're only getting 15, Charlie's getting 17. Guess what? If you can't move as fast as Charlie, bye, and we'll just have Charlie do the rest of the fixtures, you know? So there's a lot of, it's kind of interesting, because I had a job like this in Hermantown years ago. Actually, it was someone else in my company had it, and they called me in to say, how can we fix this? Hermantown is like a suburb of Duluth, very tight union area. There wasn't much work up there, so they saw this Twin City contractor coming up there to do this furniture store, and it's like, we're going to make this last as long as we can. Well, we knew what it'd take to do those furniture stores, because we'd done 3 of them before, so we knew what the labor should take, how long it should take to do things, and that type of thing. But they were going to kind of teach us a lesson, this Twin Cities contractor coming up here. Well, I had a couple of young foremen we sent up from the Twin Cities to do it, and they were tearing their hair out because they couldn't get these guys to work. So the response was, if you're not making your goals in getting the areas done on time, add more guys from the union hall. Well, the more guys you added from the union hall, the slower the work went, because now they had buddies to visit with and more guys rabble-rousing and stuff like that. So by the time they had gotten to this point where they could see they were going to go way over on their labor, then they said, what should we do? So I said, tell me the story. They told me the story I just told you. I said, here's what you do, is you bring in, we could have up to 4 guys there. You bring in 2 good guys from Minneapolis to set the pace for a week, 2 weeks, or whatever. Nobody wanted to work away from home. There was plenty of work here. Bring them in up there so they're the benchmark of where everybody else should be as far as hanging track and putting in 2x4 light fixtures. And then I said, pick 2 guys, your 2 worst guys from up there, and lay them off. And if productivity doesn't improve with the other 4 or 6 guys or whatever, you pick 2 guys a week and lay them off. And I said, I don't care if you have to finish it with 4 of our guys from Minneapolis. I will guarantee you, when you do your second round of layoff, your productivity is going to go up. Because these guys want some kind of a paycheck. Their strategy was, well, let's soak the contractor and make it last as long as we can. Our strategy was, let's motivate these guys and get them on board. So one of my toughest challenges as a foreman in the field was, I did the Convention Center Hotel, the Hilton Hotel, a 2-year project with about 40 electricians on it. Okay, I was the general foreman. I was doing that in a time when the Mall of America was going up. There was a couple other high-rise buildings going up downtown. I think it was the Piper Tower and the AT&T Tower were going up at the same time. There was probably 400 to 600 travelers in town. Guys, if they didn't like, I mean, literally guys had this attitude as, oh, I just drove by a job site. Parsons is doing a data center 2 miles from my house. I'm dragging up and going to work for Parsons so I can work 2 miles from my house. So now how do I take a crew of 40 guys, some of them guys that are part of your company, some of them are kind of transient local guys, and other guys from out of town. How do I motivate those guys to produce on my job so I can hit my labor numbers? It was a mental challenge. It was, I mean, part of it was making sure that the people understood what you were trying to do, but also to a certain extent that you were interested in them and their success and so forth. And so there was a lot of psychological games that get played to motivate. And some are crusty old travelers that really don't care. I put in 100 feet of pipe a day, and that's all you're going to get out of me. Well, maybe that works somewhere else, but that doesn't work on my job. So that was kind of finding a way to do that. Another way to keep your costs down is apprentice labor. And there's trade-offs there. I mean, a new apprentice starts at 40% of what a journeyman makes, but he's probably maybe 60% as productive once he gets trained. If all you got to do is throw 2x4 fixtures in the ceiling, you can teach him in a day to be really good at that, and you can turn him loose, and apprentice labor will help you. If you got something like a hospital where you're roughing in head walls for, everything's got to be dead on, you can't miss anything, you can't forget anything, or if you're doing something like we do a lot of in an industrial environment where a lot of it is piping over to individual pieces of equipment, there's some skill involved in the measuring that takes place and the fastening and even just moving around the job site. So sometimes apprentice labor will help you, sometimes it won't, you know. And I always remind the foreman, because it's frustrating, nobody wants the new apprentice on their job. When I was working in the union, they used to have a nickname for them. They called them Cubs. And it was an acronym that stand for C is clean up, or CU, clean up, boy. And so they used to call the apprentices Cubs. They'll send a Cub over there to do it. So they got the job of moving the material from place to place, sweeping the floor, keeping the lunchroom clean, whatever, clean up boys. And that's kind of what you did with the first year guys. But really, what I expect my guys to do with the first year guy is teach them. Start with the repetitive stuff. Screw up all these boxes. The marks are already on the wall, you know. Run my MC home runs from here to there because, you know, it's point A to point B. Here's the roll of wire, go. One of my biggest strategies over the years has been finding labor-saving tools and labor-saving materials. I mean, we have some of the, well, we have the top-of-the-line EMT bender up to 4 inches. We have excellent 2-inch to, or half to 2-inch bender to bend EMT and rigid and stuff like that. We found scissor lifts, or these GR20 lifts work better than scissor lifts, so we started migrating away from buying scissor lifts. Now we buy these GR20 lifts. Scissor lifts still have their place. They have a bigger platform and stuff like that. In big areas, they work fine. But if you're doing like a big box store, like we just finished a Total Wine and More, where you got to drive around racking and walk-in coolers and things like that, the GR20s are more maneuverable, and they're, so we look for stuff like that. It's an investment. First of all, you have to identify the things, find the things that are actually labor saving and not just touted as labor saving. And then you got to convince management to spend the money. Fortunately, in my own company, I'm that guy, and I appreciate those things, having been in the field, so you kind of get it. So now what happens if we spend money on labor saving stuff? So maybe it costs me actually more for my commodity material because I bought those special brackets or a special tool or something like that. So now this went down, but if I could save on my labor costs, say I could save 15% of my labor hours by using those strategies, that adds 6%. So if you take away the negatives of spending this extra money, now look what I brought to the bottom line. So look how that plays out. If I just did the standard do nothing, just do what we've always done, and I get my 3% profit and I'm satisfied with that, if I got a company that does $3 million a year, there'll be $90,000 in profit a year. Then the middle strategy, the first one that I told you, if I just go negotiate and do a couple things, yell at my guys more or whatever, and I can get that 3% level. Then if I'm doing $3 million a year, I've doubled my profit to $180,000. Or if I go all out, find those labor-saving things, those new lifts, those Gucci tuggers. I mean, we've got a tugger now, the top of the line Greenlee 10-ton tugger, ultra tugger. It's amazing. I mean, we go from a point where we were pulling, two guys could pull 1,000 or 1,200 feet of 500 MCM copper in a day. There's days now that they can pull 6, 7, 8,000 feet of copper in a day, and it's amazing because the labor savings are incredible. But part of it is having the right tools, having guys trained the right way, they know how to use the equipment, that type of thing, and having them be motivated to do that. So if you look at it, a company that does $3 million, this is probably give or take a 10-man shop. Now my profit went from 90 grand a year to 255,000 a year. What can I do with that net profit? Buy newer equipment, right? Buy better stuff. Stay on top of that. I can use that money for training for my people so that they get better at what they're doing. Buy a bigger boat on the St. Croix. I don't do that. The money goes back in the company to continue the process on and on and on. So. Now look how big that yellow part is out of my $100 bill. Questions, comments?
In terms of quality, you guys are very sharp, so you have full control over your labor.
Right.
And so you can put your ratio. In terms of journeyman to apprentice ratio, you maintain the 2-to-1 ratio, or
I'm the opposite. I have 2 journeymen.
2-1.
Yeah, it's actually I've probably got about 3 journeymen for every 1 apprentice.
And that's just probably more productive. How about in a heated environment? I don't want you to, I know there's a political situation, but the labor control over labor and the ratio between apprentice journeyman in the both environment, merit shops and non-merit shops.
Well, there's extremes both ways, and one of the things that I've never liked and never quite understood is you'll get residential contractors. It's a boom and bust market. They'll hire guys, essentially glorified day laborers. They'll take high school kids and have them string Romex through houses and things like that. How do you handle your quality control? For them it's just fast and cheap. That's all they look at. I've been more about, because we do so much commercial construction. I mean, we're 99% commercial construction. And we do a lot more technical stuff because we do stuff within manufacturing plants. We do generator jobs, big services and stuff like that. It's really not helpful to pile on a bunch of apprentices. Unless I've got repetitive work, like I'm doing a a manufacturing plant right now. I got 400 identical fixtures to put in. I can put an apprentice or two on that job and make some extra money, but you don't really make any extra money because when you're competing for the job, we actually do ratio our apprentice to journeyman ratio as building our labor rate in the project is, how am I going to do this? And when you look on the union side, when I was doing estimating for union shops, we weren't really too much different than that. We'd have a 2 journeymen to 1 apprentice or 3 to 1 ratio. And part of it is leadership, skill, productivity. I mean, all those different things were as important as a cheap rate. Because I'll tell you right now, I can take a $35, $38 an hour journeyman and put him on a job and have him pipe next to a first year or second year apprentice that's costing me half that much. And ultimately, productivity per dollar of labor expended will be about equal. It's a pretty rare first or second year guy that can pipe or pull wire or whatever as good or better than a committed kind of skilled journeyman. So there are trade-offs with that labor, and good shops know how to use it. And that's why you'll see in residential that they'll load up as much. In fact, a lot of them cheat. They'll drop 3 apprentices off on a job and have them rope it out, and it's like no supervision. They're breaking the state law. To me, if I have to build my company on dishonesty and breaking laws, I would rather not be in business than to not do the right things.
Thanks.
You guys want to take a few more minutes here? Are you open to hearing a little more? This might help you quite a bit, is to understand all the things that kind of come together in contracting.
You guys will 5-minute break, bathroom break, and we'll continue, or we can.
I'll talk for another 15, 20 minutes if you're willing to tune in. Okay. Well, what I developed here is kind of a flow chart. And one of my frustrations, when I helped start a company back in '95, one of my frustrations is the top managers knew a lot of this intuitively, but when we had to train a new person, it was hard for them to understand where they fit in the organization. You might have this feeling when you work for a big contractor is, okay, I come to work and my cubicle is here and Bill tells me what to do every day, but what's the big picture? How does this all fit? How do we make money? What kind of things happen behind the scenes? And this is just, it looks complicated, but it's actually as scaled back and simplistic as I could make it. People that are graduating from this class will be in this project managing and estimating side of the business, but there's other things that go to support you that are throughout the company. So if you look at just on the estimating, in the estimating department, we have to do estimator training, and we have to maintain a database for them to work on. If you're a beginning estimator, the first time they let you enter a job into Accubid or McCormick or something like that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that already went on in building the labor rates, building the assemblies, putting the material prices in there, kind of coming up with how is Acme Electric going to estimate. So that's part of what we do as management, is to set that up, estimator training in the database. And the purpose of that is to get accurate estimates. What kind of a system do I use so I, as the owner of the company, know that we're being accurate in our estimate? Another thing that we do is relationships are a big deal. How well do I get along with my vendors? Do I pay my bills? Do the salesmen trust me? Do they know I'm not going to share their numbers with their competitors and that type of thing? If you're trustworthy and you have solid relationships and you pay your bills, you get the best prices on bid day for your light fixtures and things like that. I worked with a fellow for years, was a vice president of a rather large contracting company, and he was the guy, he was bidding huge schools back in the 80s and 90s, school projects at the airport, and his MO was, he would have an auction, and there's some contractors that are known for this, is they would post a number up on their whiteboard, and say on bid day the fixture package was $400,000. That was the number they got on bid day. They would put a number up on their board and they'd say $379,000. That's what we're going to pay for those fixtures. And then they would bring the vendors in one by one and see who could beat up their factory or get their ownership to take a shot, to drop 3 or 4 or 5% off of that price. Well, what I saw evolve over time was what seemed like a really smart strategy did not work because he ticked off all the vendors and they knew he was going to do this to them. So when he would call up for a price for a project, they'd add 2% on, so they had 2% to take off. So what did that do to his success rate in bidding? All his fixture numbers were wrong to begin with, and he'd play this little game. Well, they told me 400, but I know I'm going to buy it for 379. So he would do his own little 5% deduct. He never got the real number. And it's funny how this happens, and the average person never sees it happen, but on competitive projects like that, the wholesale houses all send out a fixture quote. Say the quote comes on your fax machine or on your email and it says it's $1 million for the fixture quote. And then your phone starts ringing. That's the salesman from Graybar. He says, yeah, well, that's just our street number. For you, the number is. And I was shocked when I found out that just went on. And they justify it the same way I justify giving numbers to different general contractors that are different. I know if I work with Kraus Anderson or Mortensen, they're going to be on top of safety. They're going to run a smooth running project. They're going to keep to a schedule. They're going to help their subs be successful. But I know another dozen contractors around town that are just the opposite. They're in it for themselves. It's going to be a battle from the start to the finish. They don't know how to run a job. They don't have good soups, And so I would give a different number to that general, and I'd totally justify it. They're slow in paying their bills. I know that if Mortensen says you're going to get your check on the 10th of the month, you'll get your check on the 10th of the month, So the fixture suppliers and the switchgear suppliers are going to do the same thing to the contractor that doesn't treat them fairly or that doesn't pay their bills on time. They're going to charge them a higher price. So once you make your bid day deals, that goes into a working budget. If you're successful for the project, you go back and say, okay, I bought my commodities at 3% lower. I got somebody to give me a 1% on the switchgear. So you go back and revisit your estimate framework. I literally do that. I take and copy my estimate, and then where all my quoted stuff goes, I go back and put my real quotes where they ended up. And I build a working budget for the job. Here's what this now today with what I know what the job's going to cost to do. So that working budget that you build through estimating goes a couple places. It goes into your accounting system so you can track the job by metrics. And that's why you'll see when you're estimating a bigger job, you're going to divide it by system, you're going to divide it by floor, you're going to divide it by plan sheet. Say if you got a hospital, 3 plan sheets per floor because it's so big. Yep, and then that's so later on, I can build a working budget and I can say, I have 4,000 hours to do the 3rd floor of this hospital, go. And then I can divide it out by system. I got so much for branch circuits, I got so much for lighting, feeders, HVAC and motors. So that goes into your job management and tracking so you can do job costing. And then how you manage your project speaks to your customer relationships. One of the goals of a good contractor is, I'm not just going to build your building, I'm going to have you as a customer for life. If you put an addition on, if you need a service call, whatever it is, I want to be that guy. So how do you manage the job so that you can maintain the relationship with the general contractor and the end user? And then there's always opportunities for change orders. Change orders sound like a dirty word, but as the project evolves, they might say, okay, we had a contingency fund and we didn't use it up. So we're going to put a fountain in the lobby and we're going to build a parking ramp instead of the parking lot or whatever it is. So you have opportunities there to pick up more work with them. I've seen it happen that if the contractor doesn't know what they're doing and they don't manage this relationship, either with the general contractor or the end user, and they lose their trust, they can bring in another contractor to do the parking ramp or the fountain in the lobby or whatever if your pricing is too high or if you're not producing or whatever. So along the way, once you have your working budget, you're doing the job, you do progress billings every month. And a lot of times we'll divide those out by systems or by floor or whatever so that the people that are paying the bill can analyze it. Okay, I can see they got all the lights in on 4th floor. It's okay if they charge me for that. That's it. Final budget is how the job finally comes out, and then at the end we do a financial closeout. what happens in the field then is the field foreman needs to get project information. That project information, some of it comes out of the estimate, and it's obviously the design information, the plans and stuff like that. There's a few things that the guy in the field needs to be successful. He has to have as much information as you can give him technically about what's going to happen on the project. You have to give him good people to work with them. So part of that is, what kind of a culture did you build in your company, and are people really going to get in there and do their best, or are they just going to show up and drag their feet and find a place to take a nap in the afternoon, that kind of a thing. There's horror stories about that. And then the other thing they need is the right material, kind of staged, got to them at the right time. They need good tools to work with. So if they have information, manpower, tools, and material, they should be able to get this thing done. So that information flows down to the installation. Notice I did the installation in green. This is where we make our money. It is. If you could do all those other things wrong, right, and if they do that wrong, either fail on schedule or whatever. And then part of the installation in a bigger company is you turn in your time by job code, and so they track by metrics. Okay, I'll give you a perfect example of this. I worked for a big shop as a general foreman, and when I started getting copies of their estimates, I would look at how much time they had, for instance, for recessed lighting. And if you're laying out recessed lighting in a gypboard ceiling in a hotel lobby or a hospital common area or something where it's architectural, it's high in the air, it's time consuming to lay it out because they may have some of the lights go in an arc to match a curved wall, and others of them will be staggered to match a pattern in the floor, or who knows what they're doing. You have to figure it out as a foreman and put it up before there's any of these features in place. So you kind of have to lay out the features to figure out how to lay out the ceiling. Well, I've done a number of those jobs with radiuses and different heights of ceilings and laying out the can lights. It could take you an hour a piece just to lay them out, and they'd give you like 6/10 of an hour to put the can light in. It's like, well, that's fine in a ceiling tile where everything's square and you just hit the center of the tile. You can stack up tiles and drill 10 at a time or something like that. But if you have architectural features and it's the lighting or the layout of pendants or whatever, gets way more tricky. So anyway, what they were doing is they were underpricing the labor on their can lighting. But when I looked at their feeders, we had excellent guys for running big pipe. We had excellent guys for pulling wire and good equipment, stuff like that. They had probably twice the labor they needed in their feeders. Now, most jobs that worked out. If I'm doing an office building or a nursing home or something from the ground up, and I got feeders and panels and all that stuff that's got too much labor in it, and I got the first floor where all the architectural features are that doesn't have enough labor in the lighting, we'll be fine. It'll wash out. And I used to keep track of that, and I understood what was happening. Well, now what happened is they got 3 floors downtown in a new high-rise office building for a huge law firm, and it was all can lights everywhere and all these architectural features and stuff like that. No feeders. The feeders were already in. The panels were already in. Nothing to balance it out. They got creamed. They lost money because no one had ever figured out or listened that they didn't have enough labor in their can lights. So they got that job because there wasn't the overpriced feeders balancing out the underpriced can lights, and there was no way that foreman could be successful because they didn't give them enough time built into the installation. So that's where the labor tracking thing is huge. So then these are kind of the back office functions. You got logistics and support. How do you get the tools out to the job? Who tracks the tools? Who maintains the tools? That type of thing. Small company, it's fairly informal. I got one guy from Dunwoody that works part-time. I got one of my full-time guys as his boss that supervises it, but he's actually a full-time electrician and he's interested in doing this, so that's kind of how we handle that. How do you do purchasing? Do your guys call the shop for all their material? Are they allowed to have an account at Viking for the job where they can get stuff, that type of thing? Material system, how do you handle it on the job? Do you put it on carts? Do you package it up by floor? I found that the more organized the material is, the more productive the electricians are. If they have to walk around and look for a 1/2-inch seal tight connector, that 1/2-inch seal tight connector cost me $1.25 and then $1 a minute for every minute the guy spent looking for it. So if he can just walk over to the box and go like this and take it with him, that's one thing. If he's looking through skids of material laying on the floor, that connector might cost me $20. So how do you handle it? Tools and equipment system. How do we decide what tools go on what job when? How do we keep track of them so we get them back and they don't get ripped off and that? Manpower and crew sizing. Who runs the manpower? Who decides who gets assigned to what job when? Do you have a flexible enough system so that if I got a big push, they want to get all their above ceiling inspections done by the 15th of the month, I can sit down and calculate, okay, I got to put in 300 fixtures between now and the 15th of the month. It's going to take me 6 guys. Do I have 6 guys to send there? Or do I have to have guys work overtime or not make the deadline and take off the general? So that's kind of it. And then in the background, you've got all these things happening. Accounting and information systems is, you know, how do you maintain your computers? How do you do your accounting? How do you pay your bills? And believe it or not, there's companies that try and make money on accounts payable. And I learned from an older gentleman that ran a big contracting company that if you pay your bills on time, if you're the guy that they can always count on that they'll have their check by the 10th of the month because you're taking your discounts, you will get such good service from the wholesale houses. You'll get the best pricing. The salesman will bend over backwards to keep you. If you have a complaint about an invoice, a delivery or something, they always resolve it in your favor because you're that golden customer that they want to keep. So how do you handle those vendors and those relationships? Payroll, job costing, these are all kind of, what should I say, technical, esoteric things. And then there's clerical support. How do you write your proposals? How do you present them? There's a lot less of this that goes on now. A lot of times the project managers or the estimators are writing their own proposals. Who reviews the contracts when you get them? That's a legal type of a thing that you have to do. Bonding and insurance, if you have to buy a bond for a job. If you have a relationship with a bonding company, how do you handle that? Who runs your safety program? That's usually kind of a back office function, but it involves the field people. Shop drawings and submittals, how do you handle that? Does the project manager do it? Does your purchasing department do it? And then on your final job closeouts, who does the panel schedules, the O&M manuals, the as-built drawings, and that type of thing. And then I have this feeding back to what I call field closeout and zero punch list. One of the things I've done since I was a foreman on a job, this was shocking to me when I was a young foreman, is that I could finish a job that was 3 months, 4 months, 6 months long, and at the end of the job, like the last week of the job, in comes a geeky engineer. He's got a pocket protector in there and a little flashlight in the set of the plans, and he's walking around and going, oh, that's a 20 amp outlet. That's supposed to be a 30 amp outlet. So he writes it down. Hey, that plate's crooked. We'll write that down. Oh, there's one lamp burned out in that fixture. We'll write that down. So they're generating a list that we call a punch list. And when I saw my first punch list as an electrician, I was shocked and I was horrified. It's like I got a bad report card. I didn't want anybody back at the shop to know I missed all those things, but where does that punch list go? It goes from the engineer to the architect to the general contractor. They divide it amongst all the subcontractors. The subcontractor, the project manager, hands it off to the foreman. Now I have to go back and fix that light bulb and change that outlet and straighten that plate. And I just looked at it as being a failure, that I failed. So as a foreman, I developed systems to avoid having punch lists. And when I told the first engineer what I was doing, I said, this is going to be a zero punch list project. And he goes, no, it's not. He says, I'll believe this when I see it. And I says, well, I'll tell you this. If you're going to write something down, it's going to be so petty that it'll look silly. And so I carried this through. I did a chemical plant job. This would be back in the late 80s. It's my first zero punch list job. It was $1 million electrical job back then, which would probably be like a $3 million electrical job now. Motors, sensors, lighting. I mean, it was a ground up chemical plant. Service, motor control centers, all these things. And when the engineers came through, the labeling was right, everything was clean and operable and tested, and they had all their documentation. 0 punch list. They were amazed. It was a chemical engineering firm out of Detroit, Michigan, and they'd never seen it ever before that someone pulled off a job without anything wrong at the end of the job. But there was a concerted effort behind that of checking all of our work, double checking our work, and that type of thing. When I did the Hilton Hotel in downtown Minneapolis, the engineer came from St. Louis, Missouri, a very picky guy. When I first met him at the beginning of the project, I took him out to lunch. Now, this is a wee foreman for an electrical contracting company, taking the engineer out to lunch, getting to know him a little bit, and I told him, here's how I run a job. I'm going to have a 0 punch list project on this job. And he laughed. He laughed at me, and he goes, no, you're not. He says, my home and my office is in St. Louis. My boss buys me a plane ticket. He puts me up in a nice hotel downtown, pays for all my meals for me to come up here for 3 days to find out what's going on with the project. He says, if I don't write anything in my report, I'm going to get in trouble with my boss. And so I gave him the same line. I said, hey, Gary, here's the deal. You can write down whatever you want on your report, but it's going to be so petty as to be ridiculous. We had that building has 20 floors of guest rooms. In 20 floors, we had 8 perfect floors where he couldn't find one thing wrong. And the way I sold this to my guys is, for every perfect punch list we get, every perfect floor, I'm taking you out to lunch. Well, for a construction guy to have somebody tell him, I'm taking you out to lunch, you know, when they're eating cold sandwiches every day, that was a big deal. And I got the project manager from the shop to buy into it. Well, what does a punch list cost you to handle that information going around Rob? We had other areas where the punch list was, and that's how we ended up getting 8 perfect ones, is the lenses on the wall sconces by the elevator have a film on them. They're dirty. Or I'd have one light bulb. There was a lot of incandescent light bulbs back then. I'd have a light bulb in a wall sconce burn out. So we got to the point where I had a method of going through the floor before. And things that he would say is, like the acrylic lenses, they get charged, electrostatically charged when you handle them. And because there's so much dust in the air on a construction site, they work like a magnet for the dust. And so what we came up with is, when we installed them, it took you an extra minute. The guys had a little bottle of static guard. They'd wipe it on, put it on a rag, and they'd just wipe the back of the lens. And it eliminated that problem entirely. So anything that I saw come up as a punch list item, I made sure we figured out a strategy to get rid of it. And I literally would have a guy, I had one guy that was just my quality control inspector, and his job was, if I knew Thursday morning at 9 o'clock the engineer was going to be there, he'd walk the floor a final time at 8:35 or whatever, change any light bulbs that are burned out. Painters would take our plates off because they know it's punch list day. They take the plates off and lay them on the windowsill. Well, we did it right, but it'll show up on my punch list that the plate was off. So, you know, the painters are notorious for taking the plates off when they're touching up, putting them in their bucket. And I said, every painter in town must like have a garage full of ivory plates or something because of that. So, no, it's just interesting. So for me, I took it on as a personal challenge because I didn't want anybody picking my job apart. And when we finished the Hilton Hotel job in downtown Minneapolis, the general contractor literally handed us a job for a senior living campus, 5 buildings. They handed us that job and they said, you can have this job as our partner on it if Paul runs it. So, and it was because they loved the whole 0 punch list thing. Then they asked me to kind of work with their other subs to see if we could get them to have the same quality control. So people notice. So that's contracting 101, the economics of contracting. Questions? Sound like a fun business? It's really interesting because we built a culture in our company. I have 11, 12 electricians. We have a culture in our company where we have kind of energetic people that love the business and they love working together. And I have guys tell me all the time, it doesn't seem like a job. You know, it's athletic, it's goal-driven, it's camaraderie between the guys. They love the technology of what they do. And so can you imagine how easy that makes my job? We have no morale problems, no personnel problems. It doesn't mean we've never hired a clunker, But if we hire somebody, we know fairly early on that they're not going to work out. And I get that feedback from my foreman. They'll basically go, yeah, Bill's a nice guy, but we just can't get him to buy in. We can't get him to move, you know. It's like, I don't want to work with him. You know, maybe have this guy check him out and see what he thinks. I get 1 or 2 reports like that, that he's either got a bad attitude, you know, has trouble showing up or whatever. He's gone. That's one of the freedoms that I love about having a business where I'm not beholden to a third party. You know, I spent 30 years doing that, trying to work within that framework. And there was a lot of frustrations where you'd get stuck with clunkers that you couldn't get rid of, or people would intentionally sabotage what you were trying to do, either through morale issues or poor workmanship, or, you know, and it's kind of like, I don't need that at this stage in my life. You know, I want to work with people that love what they do, that want to find a home where they can get along with other people, thoroughly enjoy the industry. I tell you, people say, wasn't it stressful starting a business? The business I have now, I started when I was 54 years old and parted ways with the company where I was president of the company. So it was an involuntary thing. They decided they were just going to shrink their company back down to a tiny little company, and the owner was going to run it himself. And so I kind of looked at it, it's like, well, I started other companies, I've grown other companies, what am I going to do now? Well, at 54, most people are saying, well, you know, 8 more years, I can get my retirement, maybe I should just go hide out in somebody's back room or something. And I thought, we'll give it a try one more time. And it's been great. It's the least stressful thing I've done in the last 30 years. Having my own company and having good people there and just thoroughly enjoying what we do and who we work with and who we work for. And it's great. And the feedback I get from my customers is they love my guys. They love the way we do business. I just had a meeting yesterday with a big manufacturing company that I've done work with now for 8 years. And, you know, I walk in the door and the owners of the company see me and they're all excited to see me. Oh, we just love George and so. You did a beautiful job on the last project, but we got more work for you guys. And they wrote us a letter of reference to another, actually a national company a few years ago. And in their letter of reference, they said they consider this company and our people as an extension of their own company. They don't plan a project without calling us up first to find out what the impact will be electrically and things like that. And they just look at it as a long-term thing. We'll always be their electrical advisor. We'll always be that connection. That's how big companies grow and thrive in tough markets. You know, we started this company at the bottom of a recession, and we've literally doubled in size every year. We're in our 6th year. Well, thanks for your attention. I hope you got something out of it. Hope it was worth your while. I enjoy doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Paul. That's great. I always enjoyed listening to it. I hope you guys got a lot about project management from it, because that's a major part. I always enjoy the way they're managing the labor and the material and building relationship with the customers and so forth. So.
Oh yeah.
And you might end up working for Paul one day. You never know. So.
It's interesting because I have a Dunwoody Design alum that works for me now that's working out extremely well. He's been with me for 2 years now. And one day he asked me, he said, you know, this is such a complicated business. There's so many different things that you do or have to do or whatever. He said, what's the most important thing to know about this business? If you had to pick one thing. And I told him in one word, it's relationships. It's like, how do you get along with your coworkers? How do you get along with your vendors? How do you get along with your customers? If you're good at forming relationships with people and maintaining those relationships, so that means you have to work hard. You have to do what you say you're going to do. You have to have high integrity. If it's a business dealing and I have a customer complaint, trust me, that complaint is always resolved in a way that the customer is happy when we get done. I look at it as an opportunity to show the customer what we can do, you know, how we can serve them. I don't look at it as a nuisance. If somebody says, oh, you know, you installed 40 lights and we're losing so many light bulbs, what's going wrong? Well, we don't just go, well, it's a manufacturer problem or we got a bad batch of light bulbs. We go out there and actually try and figure the problem out. Is there a power quality issue? Why are the light bulbs burning out? Is it a lighting control issue? Are the occupancy sensors circling too much? Do you have too high a voltage in your building? Is there some other reason that they're doing it? And a lot of times, we're doing that work gratis, just to figure it out and solve it. Even if it's out of warranty, I'll go do that for someone, just to figure out the problem, solve the problem, and basically get a customer for life out of the deal, because they know you're gonna look out for them. They don't have to worry. Their boss isn't gonna yell at them because they had some knucklehead wire it for the cheapest price, and so, no, it's great.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely, thanks. This is right
I just wish I had more people to talk to, so more people could benefit.
You never know.